In 1914, as the First World War started, the world was on the brink of dramatic change. Nearly every aspect of life would be changed, and the cigarette was no exception. Before the war, smoking was largely associated with the underclass, criminals, outcasts, and rogues. It was seen as a health hazard and a sign of moral decline, with detractors claiming it threatened the very fabric of society. Yet, by the time the war ended in 1918, cigarettes had not only exploded in popularity but had become synonymous with patriotism and masculinity. How did such a radical shift occur? This is the story of how war turned the cigarette from a despised vice into a global phenomenon. At the dawn of the 20th century, society held the cigarette in contempt. In Great Britain, it was seen as effeminate, and in the United States, it was associated with immoral miscreants and foreigners. An alarmist article in the New York Times in 1886 warned that cigarettes could bring about the ruin of the American Republic, comparing the nation's potential decline to that of Spain, which the author blamed on widespread smoking. Public figures like Henry Ford railed against cigarettes, claiming they were the mark of criminals, while early health reformers argued that smoking would enfeeble young Americans, creating a weaker generation. Temperance activists, who spearheaded movements against alcohol, equated cigarettes with liquor, further demonizing the habit. By 1921, 15 U.S. states had banned the sale of cigarettes, but these bans were short-lived. Despite the anti-cigarette fervor, something monumental was brewing that would forever change the course of the cigarette's reputation: World War I. World War I catalyzed a massive rise in cigarette consumption. Militaries from countries such as the United States, Britain, France, and Germany began including cigarettes in soldiers' rations. In the grim, nerve-wracking trenches, where death and destruction were constant companions, soldiers found solace in cigarettes. Smoking was seen as a way to calm nerves, boost morale, and endure the horrors of war. In the U.S., General John Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, famously said, "You ask me what we need to win this war? I answer tobacco as much as bullets." Tobacco became as essential to a soldier's survival as food or weapons. The British Minister of Food, David Thomas, added that soldiers smoked to reduce their appetites, conserving precious food resources. Cigarettes quickly became the preferred tobacco product for soldiers. They were small, portable, and easier to handle than cigars or pipes, making them ideal for the trenches. Military leadership effectively became the world's largest drug dealers, ensuring their soldiers were supplied with a steady stream of cigarettes, thereby creating a generation of nicotine addicts. When the war ended, millions of soldiers returned home, many of them addicted to cigarettes. Tobacco companies seized the opportunity, launching aggressive advertising campaigns that associated smoking with patriotism, masculinity, and freedom. Chesterfield, for instance, released advertisements featuring soldiers smoking their cigarettes just 2 months after the war ended, making it clear that smoking was not just a habit but a symbol of American valor. Before the war, cigarettes were seen as effeminate, something for boys and women. But by associating them with soldiers, men who had braved the worst horrors imaginable, cigarettes were transformed into a symbol of rugged masculinity. Ads in the U.S. and Britain glorified smoking as an act of national pride. British tobacco manufacturer Wills, for example, included collectible cards depicting military servicemen in their cigarette packs, further solidifying the association between smoking and heroism. Perhaps the most striking shift in perception came from organizations like the YMCA. Before the war, the YMCA had been a vocal critic of cigarettes, with its founder calling them a growing evil. But once the war began, the organization started distributing cigarettes to soldiers, reasoning that smoking was a lesser vice compared to alcohol or prostitution, and was necessary to keep soldiers' morale up in such dire conditions. Health concerns about cigarettes seemed almost laughable on the battlefield, where men faced constant danger from bullets, shells, and gas attacks. One YMCA member put it bluntly, "Many a sorely wounded lad has died with a cigarette in his mouth whose dying was less bitter because of the poison pill." In the trenches, the potential health risks of smoking paled in comparison to the immediate dangers of war. When soldiers returned home after World War I, they brought their smoking habits with them. In the U.S., tobacco companies wasted no time in capitalizing on this. Chesterfield, Camel, and other brands launched advertising campaigns featuring soldiers smoking, tapping into the emotions of post-war patriotism and nostalgia. In France, cigarette consumption rose by 31% between 1913 and 1919. Germany saw a similar surge, with cigarette production more than doubling in the years following the war. What had once been a habit of the outcast became mainstream, as cigarettes were now associated with bravery, masculinity, and sacrifice. World War II took cigarette consumption to new heights. The U.S. shipped 92 billion cigarettes abroad each year during the war, compared to 7.5 billion in World War I. Cigarettes became such a prized commodity that hoarding and panic buying became common in both the military and civilian sectors. In the U.S., cigarette manufacturers went into overdrive, increasing their output from 172.5 billion cigarettes in 1939 to 267.8 billion in 1945, a staggering 55% increase. Advertising during World War II further entrenched the association between cigarettes and patriotism. Cigarette companies urged civilians to send cigarettes to soldiers overseas, portraying this as a way to support the war effort. Advertisements targeted both men and women, with companies like Camel promoting cigarettes as the perfect gift for servicemen, while also marketing to women who had taken up war-related vocations. Cigarettes became the smoke of choice for everyone, from soldiers on the front lines to women working in war factories, cementing their place as a cultural icon. By the end of World War II, cigarettes were more than just a tobacco product. They were a symbol of freedom, strength, and patriotism. In the U.S., cigarette consumption continued to soar, with advertisers cleverly tying the product to ideals of masculinity and national pride. The war had turned smoking into a widespread, almost ubiquitous habit, one that would remain popular for decades to come. But as history shows, what was once celebrated would later face scrutiny. In the years following the wars, the dangers of smoking became more apparent, leading to public health campaigns aimed at reducing tobacco use. Still, the legacy of cigarettes as a product shaped by war endures. The cigarette's meteoric rise is a story intertwined with the wars that shaped the modern world, and it's just one example of how conflict can have far-reaching consequences. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and want to learn more about how technology, industry, and society evolve, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Hypertech. Stay tuned for more fascinating stories that reveal the hidden connections between the past and the present.